let me introduce you our UK artist Pola Cheyni, who will present his research done in Donetsk in 211-214 and how it actually influenced by war condition and before this deep research. So I give the word to Paul, and after definitely gonna have a discussion. Для тих, хто захоче ставити питання українською, ми можемо їх перекласти. So I switch word to Paul and another.
Okay. Hello. Thank you very much for the invitation to come here. It's very nice to be here. I can't see anybody now. You've all disappeared into the dark. So I'm going to talk about this project I did in Donetsk, but I'm going to introduce quite a broad concept before. And I want to ask your forgiveness because I don't have any personal experience of war, and I'm not trying to pretend I know anything about war. So I'm going to speak about this topic with humility and respect to everybody who is here. But I want to offer a different perspective that may or may not be useful to this conference and to the questions that it's trying to find answers for. And the things that struck me about the question of this conference, about this new internationale, is well, the first thing is this, like finding conceptual structures and pathways for thinking and imagining that we should develop, and also thinking about the capability of being both local and global at the same time, through which we maybe can construct common tools to work with. So, just generally, thinking about the reasons for war, and if we look at traditional historical sources, we are told that war is about religion, often. One moment. We're told that war is about religion, and it's about race, national identity, political identity, fear of the unknown, revenge for terrorist acts, and to emancipate the oppressed. And this is what the state tells us, that this is what war is about. But if we begin to look closely, we can see that virtually all war starts because of money and because of greed. Religion and national identity are used as pretexts to mobilize ordinary working people into fighting, while the highest classes, the political class, the oligarchies, the financial service providers get rich from the process. So in ancient times, when the idea of settled nation-states was perhaps more flexible, war was a mechanism for claiming new lands and the wealth of resources. So you can see in this animation here of the history of the world. So these are kind of these are movements and changes in empire and empire building from the beginning of human civilization. I'm just going to fast forward, and I hope the internet connection can keep up. You can see all of these borders are constantly changing. These empires are constantly growing and like moving into new lands, new territories to capture new wealth. So this kind of war was undertaken by nomadic tribes against other nomadic or partially settled people before the modern concept of rigid state boundaries and nationhood was established. This kind of war is a war of colonization and shifting recolonization, and assimilation of tribes and tribal identities, which made sense to nomadic societies where wealth and power is based on land, surface, resources, for example, agriculture, camels, horses, and things like this. You can get the idea. Wars have also been fought to finance other wars. For example, the colonization of South America in the 15th century by Spain, which was basically a method for obtaining gold in order to finance the European crusades into the Arab lands. These so-called religious crusades were apparently undertaken to secure European access to holy Christian sites in the Middle East, which were controlled by the Ottoman Empire and the Arab empires. But of course, a lot of these sites also happened to be on important trade routes that connected the East to the West, and all the highest ranking people who were involved in these wars became incredibly rich, as did the nation-states that organized the campaigns, and the churches that curated pseudo-religious premise. War has also been a mechanism for claiming new lands and new resources in, for example, the colonization of Africa. During the 19th century, millions of Africans were killed and traded into slavery to provide free labor for white European businesses in the European-owned sugar, coffee and chocolate plantations in the Americas and in the Caribbean. But at the time, the authorities that sanctioned these wars rationalized them by saying that all Africans were primitive savages who were possessed by the devil, and they needed to be colonized so that their souls could be saved by Jesus. This was therefore marketed as a religious war, and the ordinary working class men who fought in Africa were told that they were killing these more or less prehistoric people to save the world from the influence of the devil. But the truth is that the city centres of London, Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam, which are filled with impressive architectures and engineering masterpieces, were built with money created from the slave trade, the coffee trade, gold, diamond mining, etc. The modern capital cities of Europe are actually built with African blood. In the same way, India was colonized by England for cotton, Hong Kong for control of the opium trade. Pretty much all modern wars, or modern civil wars in Africa and Asian post-colonial states have been secondary effects of European colonization caused by disruption of tribal power and artificially created national borders that don't allow for migration away from famine, and of course because of their access to modern weapons which are supplied by European countries. Let's have a quick think about the Second World War. Before the rise to power by Adolf Hitler, the German Weimar Republic was in complete economic crisis. In 1932, unemployment was at 30%, and the country suffered hyperinflation. Hitler became Chancellor and took control of the German economy in 1933, and he promised huge economic reforms. But actually, all of these reforms failed, and the German economy was left with a huge hidden deficit that reached a maximum in 1938, which coincided with the Kristallnacht and the beginning of the destruction of the Jews of Europe and the reappropriation of all of their property. So the wartime economy of Germany boomed, and all of Germany's financial problems disappeared almost instantly, with full employment in 1939. So could we say that the Holocaust concept was actually developed as a financial mechanism to save the economy of Germany? In modern times, wars are still fought explicitly over control of land and valuable geological resources. For example, in Africa, over diamond-rich territories in Angola, Ivory Coast and Sierra Leone, where there is a modern trade in the so-called blood diamonds to this day. But this is not so common now. Wars in the modern period tend to be more complex. It is no longer possible to explicitly destroy whole populations of foreign lands and steal their resources. However, the truth that the organizers of war become rich through the process of war is still true. In a world of globalized production and globalized commerce, war has become a mechanism for controlling markets and for the creation of abstract capital. In neoliberal states, huge financial benefits are gained by corporations who are awarded contracts to rebuild and provide security in post-war situations. For example, the global corporation Halliburton in the case of the Gulf War in 1990, and the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Between 2003 and 2006, Halliburton Incorporated billed the US government for $17.2 billion. This was money awarded for the construction and maintenance of military bases, oil field repairs, and various infrastructure rebuilding projects across the war zone. These corporations that directly benefit from armed conflict are often explicitly linked to political lobbies. Of course, in the case of Halliburton, it was Dick Cheney, who I'm happy to say is no relation to me. 1989 to 1993, Dick Cheney was Secretary for Defense. 1995 to 2000, he was the CEO of Halliburton. 2001 to 2009, he was Vice President of the USA. So we can clearly see the connection between politics, war, and business. Sometimes I even think, in an abstract way without having any evidence for it, that maybe even ISIS is primarily a business operation. The illegal distillation of petrol stolen from crude oil, and then the trade in this smuggled fuel, and the trade in stolen women and children, is a multi-million-dollar business that has made the leaders of ISIS rich in comparison to their origins as small-time warlords. So this is the website of SIPRI, which is the Stockholm International Peace and Research Institute. And this is like a secondary connection between war and capital, of course, which is the arms trade. So in 2012, SIPRI's estimation of the military expenditure, global military expenditure, was $1.8 trillion. Which, I mean, $1.8 trillion is larger than the national economy of Canada. And it's 20 times larger than the national economy of Ukraine, for example. This is like a huge amount of money. I don't know if anyone's seen this website. It's very interesting to like have a look at these databases. So here you can select any country, and I'm going to, just for the sake of argument, because we want to think about a current war, I'm going to select. I can read it. It's very small on my screen here. I'm going to select Syria, and I'm going to select the time period from 1996 to 2016. I'm going to select, keep this selection here to summarize data by supplier. And there you can see the data. And it's kind of quite clear, without being partisan in this case, why the main actor in the Syrian war has an interest in this war, because it makes pretty good business. We could also, and these are like in millions of dollars, right? So this is like $1.4 billion of arms bought by Syria from Russia in this time period. But we can also look at exports to, for example, United Arab Emirates, same period. And there we can see why the United States supports the United Arab Emirates war in Yemen, for example. So this is a really interesting and useful resource to like try and explicate and understand this flow of capital that's connected between different countries and who sells weapons to who and how much money they're making. And then you can sort of begin to track back from that and make an analysis of the politics. So, to conclude the first part, I just really want to propose that there is often, if not always, something hidden under the surface, and that the reasons for war which are given to us, the ordinary people, to believe in are always different from the reasons that are in the minds of the leaders. And really, we should be looking at the relationship between war and money, war and the systems of capital, and the control of global resources, which is often mineral resources, coal, oil, copper, plutonium, gold, etc. Because the physical reality of war on the ground is that it is always a fight between poor people and some other poor people. But actually, the hidden fight is always between poor people and the rich, who create illusions and trick the poor into giving their lives for the creation of wealth. And this is perhaps something useful to think about in developing this language for a political internationale, that we are actually united because the poor of all sides are equally manipulated in this way. Okay, that's enough of lecturing. I'm going to show you this project that I did in Donetsk now. So you obviously all know a lot about Donetsk, and you know more about it than me. But I had this opportunity to go there in 2011 when I was invited by Izolacja, when they were still based there, to go on a residency. And the residency was about turbo-realism, which is this obscure kind of genre of science fiction, which may or may not exist. So it was not really clear whether it was a real literary genre or not. But anyway, when I got to Donetsk, I was quite fascinated by the city and fascinated by the fact that it was a coal mining city. I've been thinking about coal for a long time, and I've been thinking about geophilosophy and the relation of geological materials and geological contingency, and how geology has an agency on the human and how it connects to capital. So when I got to Donetsk, I was pretty excited by its sort of mineral heritage, if you like, but also when I started to look into the history of it, I was really shocked and surprised to understand that Donetsk was, of course, founded by this British industrialist in 1869, the infamous John Hughes. And so I started to research into the history and into the history of this guy, John Hughes, and how he got to be there. And I looked into all sorts of archives, and when I was back in the UK, I visited the archives in Wales. So after the revolution, all of the British engineers went back to the UK and took with them an archive of photographs and other documents. But so Donetsk was founded in 1869, and it was basically a capitalist venture. So I don't know if you know this history. Maybe I'm boring you, but I'll just continue. The reason why Donetsk was founded as a city was because of the failure of the Russian army in the Crimean War in the 1850s. And as Russia lost that war against the European allies, the British and the French and the Turks, I think, they were kind of questioning how they'd lost this war. And they decided it was because they didn't have the modern military technology that the European allies had. So they started to headhunt people. They started to look for people who could help them to develop their military capability. And so they went to London and they found this guy, John Hughes, who had been, I'll show you his picture again. Here, this is the city that John Hughes was born in. He was an engineer. He didn't have any qualifications. He couldn't read or write. He was one of these like typical Victorian self-made men who'd trained as a coal miner and then sort of gradually worked up and become more and more qualified in the techniques of materials and machinery. And so he was in London and he had formed this company. Oh dear. He'd formed a company to manufacture iron fortresses. And when the Tsar sent his team out to find people that could help to improve the military technology of the Russian forces, they found him in London making these iron fortresses. And initially they tried to commission him to improve the military capability. So John Hughes went out to Ukraine with his team of Welsh engineers and looked at the situation and told the Tsar that actually he didn't need to improve the military so much as he actually needed to build a railway, because this was what was holding Russia back, was the fact that it had missed the sort of industrial revolution because it didn't have a railway system. So John Hughes was responsible for encouraging the Tsar to actually to invest in making a railway system for Russia. And this is what he did. He formed this company, which kind of ironically is called the New Russia Company. And this is a copy of one of the original share certificates. And he went around London collecting capital, collecting investors, and all of these very well-known and typical British capitalists, lords and aristocrats and engineers, like the person that created the whole of the Great Western Railway System in England, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who was like a famous bridge engineer. They all invested money in this new Russia company. They bought all of these shares. And it's pretty interesting to see. You can see this like formation of this military-industrial complex from the very beginning. I don't know if you can read it up there. You can probably read it better than me, but it says here in the original articles of when they created the company, that the company was to manufacture locomotive engines, railway carriages, wagons, turntables, and every description of rolling stock, rails, railway plant, which is obviously to do with railways and making a rail network, but then also armour-plated and other ships, iron forts, turrets, shields, embrasures and other war defences of iron, and other materials, shot, shells and weapons, ammunition and materials of war of all and every kind. So this is like the original founding document of the New Russia Company, which is the reason why John Hughes made this city there. It was based on a military-industrial complex and based on this kind of like war trauma from the failure of the Russian action in Crimea in 1853, 1856. Oh dear, this is very annoying. Back to where we were. So John Hughes goes out onto the steppe with his team of engineers and makes this ironworks. And it very quickly becomes the largest ironworks in the whole of the Russian Empire at the time. And it continues to grow, and it becomes the largest ironworks in the whole of the Soviet Union as well. Here's an example of the kind of thing that they were producing. So it's obviously part of the rail network. But why did this happen particularly there? And the reason why all of these things came together and this huge new city was built was because of this, this conjunction of all of these different geologies. To make iron, you need coal, you need iron, obviously, and you need limestone. And in Donbass, there's all of these things. So I sort of started to become interested not only in the history of John Hughes and his connection to the city and this movement of capital between England and Russia, because at the time, of course, they were enemies. So this is like an early, we tend to think of globalization as a modern problem, but this is just not true. You know, this has been happening for a really long time. So this is foreign enemy capital being transferred into the Russian Empire to actually work to advance the military capability of the enemy. So this is like completely, there's no moral to capitalism, right? But how did everything get to be there? This was my question. Like, I can understand the modern history and the movement of capital, but also I wanted to start to understand why and how all of these materials became there. And I was, at the time, very interested in geophilosophy and in the philosophy of speculative realism, which is a philosophy which tries to kind of undermine or destroy the importance of the human and to try and help us understand our position in the world at the moment and our connection to this concept of the Anthropocene. And how it can be that we've come to this point where we're almost destroying the home planet that we live on. And I began to think through these geophilosophical questions that geology itself has this kind of agency, like the materials themselves have a kind of power. So I wanted to sort of understand this, and I wanted to try and describe the history of the city and the reasons why it's there now, purely in terms of its materials, of the chemistry, of the physics and the chemistry, of its geology. So I started to make diagrams trying to describe how these materials came to be there, the coal, the carbon, the iron, etc. These were some sort of early versions just trying to work out how the chemistry actually worked. So it became clear that I needed to make a timeline, that this was going to be a chronology. And the timeline didn't stop at 1869, and it didn't stop at the formation of the coal 360 million years ago, and it didn't stop at the creation of iron, because or the formation of iron in the geological layers, because all of these materials came from somewhere even further back. And I decided that actually this timeline that describes the history of Donetsk would have to go all the way back to the Big Bang, which is a bit of a crazy idea. So when I was in Izolacja, they gave me this building to use, this building here, and we started to make a plan of how I would design this diagram to show the history of the city just because of its materials, and we started to make installation plans, and we started to make a renovation on the building. And then, of course, the war started, and everything stopped. And this was kind of quite a crazy scenario, because I was trying to show how that the geology had its own agency, how there was this kind of like geological trauma that created the coal and the iron, and that these releasing of this trauma, which I'll talk about later, is the thing that made war. You know, war follows materials, war follows wealth, and follows mineral resources. And in the case of Donetsk, it's been at war several times before, you know. It's been a very fought-over area, just because of its mineral riches and because of the potential for capital. This was the cellar of the building where the diagram was going to start. And when the war started and when Izolacja got occupied by the DNR, then this actually became like some prison this particular room. So it was just really strange how the thing that I was trying to describe, and this sort of like geological trauma, was happening again as I was trying to make the work. It was quite disturbing. So for 3 years or 2 years, nothing happened, and I couldn't complete the work. The installation plan was completely abandoned. But I continued to do the research and continued to try and develop this methodology for showing this history just through materials. And finally, at the beginning of this year, this gallery in Prague offered me to complete the work and install it there. So this is like some pictures from the installation. So you can see over here, this little, where this line kind of disappears into nothing. This is the Big Bang. And this diagram is to scale. It's very precisely to scale. It's, everything is quite scientifically accurate about it. In fact, once I've done all the research and I've made the plan for the installation, I showed it to the head of geology department at Charles University in Prague, because I really wanted to be sure that it was kind of accurate. And he made one small change in the whole thing. So I was really pleased about that. You'll see why as I show you more pictures. It was a very complicated thing to attempt, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a geologist, I'm just a stupid artist, right? So every meter of this diagram represents 100 million years of time. So it's the first part is 137 meters long. And originally, in the installation where it was going to be in Donetsk, it would have filled this building, and it would have taken up 3 floors of the building and gone up the stairs and sort of ended up on the top floor. But here I only had 1 floor, so I had to find a way to make it fit into the room. So I designed this installation where it kind of like went around 3 times and had to go over the ceiling to make everything fit. So from the Big Bang, which is just here, around here, nothing really happens for a little while until the first stellar nucleosynthesis. So each of these colours represents a different element. In the beginning of the universe, there's only 2. You've got hydrogen and helium. And then later on, the hydrogen and helium get founded in the centre of exploding stars, and you get iron, and you get carbon, and you get nitrogen and calcium, which are what you need to make iron, limestone, and coal. This part here, let me see, might be a better one. Yeah, this part here, this represents the formation of the planet Earth. So at this point, the line has gone around the room 3 times. And this is 45 meters from the end of the line. And this is the formation of the planet Earth, when these elements kind of like divide out and congeal into the planet Earth as we begin to know it. And you get the first atmosphere, so you get the nitrogen comes up into the atmosphere, some of the nitrogen stays in the crust, so you get a division. Here's the gas, and here's the solid. And then very quickly after the formation of the Earth, you get the impact of the moon, or the asteroid that hits the Earth and creates the moon. And you get the big change in the atmosphere again. And it goes on, and there's all of these very crazy chemical and geological shifts and changes as different materials like move from one sphere into the other sphere. So at this point here, can you see the cursor there? There's, you've got atmosphere, ocean now, and then crust at the bottom, like the rocks. So this is the point where the first sort of formation of iron happens, because basically iron, at this point in the history of the planet, was a solution in the ocean. There wasn't solid iron as we know it on the surface of the crust. All of the iron was in the ocean, and it was in a liquid form. And it was only when the evolution of cyanobacteria started to happen, and bacteria for the first time started to create oxygen, and this oxidized the iron that was in the water, and the iron all falls down to the bottom, it rusts, and starts to form these layers, which build up and up and up. And then later on, those layers are what are mined out to sort of be heated by the coal to smelt the iron to make the machines that we have now. So this is all about geological contingency. It's all about this idea of trying to show the history of one place through the origin and the history of its materials. You can see that also I had to just make formal kind of decisions to squeeze things to make it fit into the space, so you get these quite formal arrangements like this. And so this whole thing is hand-drawn, right? It's like drawn with a pencil and coloured in by hand. It was 3 months' work to draw it. And by the end of it, I could hardly see. It was like this section here shows the formation of coal, and everything's completely related specifically to Donbass and Donetsk. So here is the formation of the Donbass Rift Basin, which is where in the Donbass Basin there was like a particular geological depression. Like the earth sunk down, and at this time in the Carboniferous period, 360 million to 300 million years ago, there was this depression there, like a big low lake, and all the forest which was growing there, obviously died and compacted into itself and built up and up and up over these 60 million years to form the coal basin and the coal beds. And it shows here how the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so this is the atmosphere, this is the biosphere now. Now we have this sphere of animals and plants. This is the ocean, or the hydrosphere, and this is the crust, the rocks, or the lithosphere. And in the case of the Carboniferous period, the carbon dioxide gets sucked down into the biosphere, and then at the end of the Carboniferous period, the carbon gets expelled and sort of forms into the crust as coal. So you can see that there's the same amount of materials in the whole, at any stage in the line, there's the same amount of physical quantity of materials, but they just kind of change between the spheres and move around. Because this planet is just nothing, there's nothing new that can appear here. It's all here already, and it can't go anywhere. So when you burn a piece of coal, it goes into the atmosphere, or if it doesn't, nothing sort of disappears magically and nothing appears magically. It's just a case of things transferring between the spheres. I'll come back to this idea in a bit. And then it kind of had to change scale, because what we have here at the end of the line in this first room, it's 137 meters long. Human civilization, 10,000 years of human civilization, appears in the last 0.1 millimeter of this line. So this is a really great thing for me to sort of be able to portray and to sort of make into a diagram that people could look at. Because we've got 137 meters of geological history, and the whole of humanity fits into the last 0.1 millimeter. So this is really humiliating, really great. But to tell the next part of the story, I had to expand that scale, so then it enters into the next room. This is a view back into the first room. This part here shows the colonization of the steppe and the Donbass by the various different early cultures. that came there. So this section here has a scale of 2,500 years per meter, so it's 4 meters long. And then there's another jump in scale, because I wanted to show much more detail about what happened to all of these materials, what happened to this geology in the modern period. So then it changes scale to 20 years per 1 meter. And also in this final room I had all of this archive material which I'd found, which was about the history of Donetsk, the story of John Hughes, the connection with capital, the movement of people, and the contemporary situation with the separatist movement, and with various other phenomena that happened there in the 90s, like these so-called Donetsk wars, and the mafia involvement in extraction of coal. So I wanted to show how the coal came there, and then I wanted to show how the coal got out from the ground. And then in this final section, you can see this is where basically the city got industrialized. And over here is when John Hughes arrived and built the first ironworks and started to extract the coal. And then we come all the way through here to, this is like the 1980s. Each of these lines going up from here to here, each one represents, I think each one represents 10 million tons of coal extracted. So at the beginning, you can't see it in this photograph very well. I think you can just make it out there. There's one line. So this is the first 10 million tons. And then the second 10 million tons is here. And then slows down because of the First War, slows down because of the Revolution and the Civil War. And then it starts to pick up again, and then slows again for the Second World War and the occupation by Germany, and then it starts to pick up again, and it's gradually there's more and more extraction. There's more coal transfers from the rock layer up into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide gas. And then at the very end, this is there's a kind of a drop-off in extraction through the 90s, and then slowly starts to pick up again with foreign investment in new infrastructure, and then we have 2014 where it stops completely. And there's another line here which I didn't explain, which is like local population. So it can also show how the local population grows. Here it peaks in the 1970s. And then, of course, now, this big population movement out of the area. So it was really just an attempt to trying to show everything that had happened to this one place, but just purely by its chemistry. And it was an experiment in this kind of geophilosophical theory. These are some of the working drawings and plans and calculations I did to make this diagram. And that's the kind of overview of the installation. So I want to talk a little bit about geophilosophy, because I think geophilosophy and this whole kind of way of thinking about reality in terms of its geological materials and the way that works with capital is important to the question of this conference. And so what is geophilosophy? It's a thought structure that sort of whose tools allow creative thinking about the processes of geology, tools that break down and blur the lines of conceptual dualism between the human and nature. So this is one of the premises of speculative realism, is that there is no separation between humans and nature. We're just kind of acting out some kind of, it's not deterministic, but it's we're not in control of ourselves as much as we think. like geology has an agency over us. And what power does geology have over us? And how does capital integrate with those materials to have power over us? Reza Negrestani is a very useful guy here. This is his book, Cyclopedia. And he's an Iranian philosopher who wrote this incredible work of theory fiction. So theory fiction is this thing where you're kind of like making a theory, but you're also making a fictional story about it. It's very, very interesting. It's kind of a bit like a science fiction, but not set in the future. So his concept of this book, Cyclopedia, was to analyze the oil in the Middle East and the way in which wars have been fought over it. And he kind of like made this connection with the oil and this ancient demonic force. So his proposal was that the oil is actually the physical embodiment of a demon which existed for thousands of years. And this ancient demon is very powerful, and what the demon wants is to make the whole world flat. And he wants to make the whole world hot, and he wants to make the whole world into a desert. And the demonic force doesn't actually mind how that happens. Like, the demon is happy to use George Bush, or he's happy to use Osama bin Laden. As long as the world becomes flat, and as long as everything becomes a desert, he's going to be really happy. So this is this kind of like idea of materials controlling us, which was kind of like one of the bases, I guess, for this whole work. So thinking about going back to coal and why coal is there, and trying to sort of theorize or make a theory fiction about coal, and try and see it as this thing outside of us that is controlling us rather than us controlling it, we have to start thinking about the sun. And the reason is because of, well, there's a useful philosopher to think about the sun is Georges Bataille, who's a French philosopher, French surrealist philosopher, who had this whole kind of idea of a solar economy, where he used the sun as a metaphor for the unbound kind of image of capital. Because of course we as like ancient humans worshipped the sun as a giver of life. But Georges Bataille sort of opens up this darker reasoning about the sun. And in his book, The Accursed Share, he describes how the economy of the sun fuels all life on Earth. He says, "It is the green parts of the plants, of the solid earth and the seas, which endlessly operate the appropriation of an important part of the sun's luminous energy. It is in this way that light, the sun, produces us, animates us, and engenders our excess. This excess, this animation, are the effects of the light. We, us humans, are basically nothing but an effect of the sun." But there's a much darker part still, because for Bataille, the economy of the sun was an economy of extravagance and absolute wastage. Because the destiny of the sun is to burn itself up, completely and with no reservation. The giant burning orb at the centre of the planetary system is described by Reza Negrestani as a continual thermonuclear catastrophe, which, if it wasn't held in check by the gravitational pull of its own spinning mass, would expand out and like destroy everything. And it will do, of course, one day. The sun will burn everything. It will burn us, burn the planet, and burn itself up, which is a perfect metaphor for rampant capital that has no bounds. Everything must get used up in this kind of like suicidal drive to self-annihilation. But there's something kind of quite unique about this planet, thankfully. Because we have life on this planet, right? And life itself, in the Carboniferous period, kind of formed a resistance against the sun. During the Carboniferous period, when the coal was formed, the sun was actually becoming much hotter. The sun had been much cooler previous to that. And as the sun became hotter, the atmosphere of the planet was heating up too. And basically there was too much carbon in the atmosphere. Everything was going to overheat. Everything was going to get cooked. So for this 60 million year period, in the Carboniferous period, the life of the planet itself kind of like operated this resistance against the sun's violence. It kind of, I call it the Carboniferous insurgency. It's when there's like trillions and trillions of tons of life sucked carbon out of the atmosphere and stored it into the rocks. And this is kind of connects then to a speculative reading of Freudian and Frenzian trauma theory. So Sandor Frenzy was a student of Freud, and his model of trauma was a little bit different than Freud's, because he said that what happens in case of trauma is that the traumata itself is like absorbed into the body or into the mind, and the mind or the body creates a crust or a hard layer over the top of the trauma to keep it inside as a discrete insider to stop it from doing any harm. And so there's this parallel between this idea of an introverted trauma and this like creation of the coal which is sucked into the surface of the planet to make it safe. And this is kind of my slightly abstract speculation, maybe, that this violence, which was somehow held at bay by the biosphere itself, when it's released, it creates more violence. Or there's this kind of like connection between geology, trauma, and this kind of repeating of solar violence, and that's kind of like what we need to think about, perhaps, or we need to think about these kind of implications of the Anthropocene, the machine age, the connection between material, the connection between geology and capital, and our relationship to all of these things, if we're going to understand like the true reasons why humans go to war. And maybe this is like a way of thinking about these situations in a way that's like non-partisan or like beyond national borders. If we can somehow understand that we're just playing out this trauma which is already somehow sort of invested in the earth, and that if we can understand that and understand how to control that or how to treat that in a different way, then maybe we can move forward in some way. So that's the end of the official talk. But we can carry on talking. I'm really up for like questions, and we can open up some more things that I've been talking about if you want to. If we can put the lights on. I want to say that actually that this case of Donetsk is not unique. Like, I'm not trying to say that this thing that happened there is unique. It's a really universal situation. It's just that somehow in Donetsk there's like maybe less boundaries, or there's like more potential for it to sort of happen in a more violent way or something, perhaps, just because of the historical conditions, because it's a new city, because populations were moved from so many places, and all of these other questions. And there's lots and lots of incidences of geological trauma affecting populations and bringing bring war because of materials and things. And I'm also not saying that the war in Donbass is because of the geological materials that there are there now, because we all know that the industry there is pretty collapsed and isn't worth very much, actually. So this isn't the reason why there's a war there now, but there's something somehow connected to the rapid growth of the city, the movement of people, the unfettered application of capital, and the fast extraction of materials, which kind of left this scenario where the local conditions can kind of like be abused by international politics or like international political agendas somehow. I just wanted to make that clear. Is there any questions?
Hello. I have of course I have a question. Do you think that our understanding of wars and some political engagement as this through the lens of speculative realism and with the concrete example of the materials and stuff, do you think this can somehow translate into some political praxis, or is it only for, is this understanding ever going to be helpful in terms of some political actions?
Yeah. It's good, thanks. I think it is, but I think it's like, I mean, I admit this is really speculative and kind of quite abstract, but I think what's mostly important is not so much the geological trauma and the speculative realism part, but just the realization that capital, the connection between capital and war. And I think that this is the important part for political action, is to understand that, you know, it's war on the ground is always fought between poor people, right? Like the actual soldiers who are fighting each other are always poor, and the people that benefit from war are always rich at the top. And it's somehow like there's a common, I mean, I'm an anti-capitalist, I guess, and so I think that there's this common enemy, which is this like minority that holds all of the power and all of the money. And there's so many ways that they manipulate political agendas, topics of religion, race, ethnicity, to get everybody to fight each other so that they can just sort of like extract capital from the situation in so many different ways. So I think that's where the political action can like exist, is to understand this like universal problem. Like the enemy is not the guy over the border who's like in the same class or same financial strata as us. The enemy is the guy at the top who has all of the money in the offshore bank accounts and has the huge yacht in the south of France, you know?
Hello, I also have a question. You intended to have artistic output from the beginning, no?
Sorry, one.
That you were invited to do this research, but
yeah.
The output was to be in a gallery. So what are the advantages to do this kind of research in the frame of art?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Actually, the residency that I was invited to do in Isolazio was a completely different subject. It was a completely different topic, and I made a completely different works for that. This was something that I just wanted to do myself, and Isolazio kind of agreed to display it, but there wasn't any kind of like support in way of a fee or something like that. So it's just something I wanted to kind of try and expand this idea and this theory that I had myself. I don't know if it is an artwork. Like sometimes I look at it and think it's really not an artwork. It's like a kind of school science project gone mad, you know?
Yeah, but you show it in a gallery.
Mm-hmm. well, I couldn't show it anywhere else. I mean, I tried to show it in Donetsk, in izolație, in the cellar, but that didn't work. But I guess if I didn't know that it would be possible to show it in a gallery, then I wouldn't make it, because otherwise it would just be in my apartment under my bed. But I guess because I'm supposedly an artist, then I can do these things, and it made sense. But sometimes I think, yeah, it would be better to be in like just some public space that isn't a gallery. In fact, one thing that really inspired me about this project was something that inspired me to do this project, to think about scale, to think about trying to portray this huge amount of time in a way that you could sort of like look at the contemporary and look at the past over these 13.7 billion years. Was a project that I saw in the UK, which was made by this old scientist, and he was really annoyed because he was an astronomer, and he was very frustrated that all of the books that children have always show the solar system all on one page. Like, you open the book and there's the whole solar system like on one page, yeah. And he was like very frustrated because he's saying like, this is not how it is. This doesn't show anything. Like, children can't learn from this. They've got no understanding of the size of the solar system. So he made this like a public walk, and it was next to a river, and it was, if I try and remember this correctly, I think it was 12 kilometers long, this walk. And you start at the beginning is like Pluto. Pluto is the furthest planet, right? I think maybe there's some more now, but I don't know their names. Pluto is the first planet. And Pluto was a little, everything was to scale. So Pluto was a little metal ball, like 4 millimeters across, like set onto the top of some piece of beton. It was like this little ball. And then you had to walk to the next planet. And the next planet was like 8 kilometers to the next one. And the next one was 6 millimeters big, you know? And it continued until the sun. You know, the Earth was maybe 1.5 centimeters, something like this. I can't quite remember, maybe 4 centimeters. And then the sun was something like 2 meters in diameter, but 12 kilometers away from this Pluto. This was really, really nice. And this wasn't an art project. This was like a scientist who was frustrated at the way in which these realities of the universe can't be described or can't be understood in everyday perception. There were some things about the installation which were like this on the left, this thing. I mean, this is, some people looked at that and said, oh, that's like a solar-lit wall painting or something. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's just practical, because I have to squash it to fit it into the room. And they say, well, why didn't you just like cut some part of it out? And I was like, I couldn't do that, because I'm trying to show this continuum and show it in the correct scientific scale. So it is strange. It's a strange project. And it's something about how it, I think for me, the artistic part of it is the way that it deliberately refuses to show like any kind of humanity. It's like showing a completely human story, but it refuses to show the human at all. Like there's no humanity about it. And this is how it connects to speculative realism, and how it's, and I think that's the kind of probably the most sort of artistic part of it, if you like.
Thank you for a talk. I'm from Donetsk. We also was in izolație. Hope to speak you later, but now I want to ask that this is graphs, books, as you know, this forecasting, as in economy, they draw, and afterwards you could predict the future. There's some tendency. Could you draw it by your hand, so or handwork? Do you feel some future according to these graphs?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is. You can see the final part of it here, right? It just stops. But I did. When I made this, I was thinking that actually this will never be finished. If I commit to make this artwork, actually it will never be finished. Like I should continue my whole life, right? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone can predict, right? I mean, we know what we would like, but.
But from this geological point of view, in which materials the Earth could, after another few millions years, in which materials it could finish, stop, death? What it could be?
I don't know. This is a question for a scientist, not a stupid artist. But I think someone said to me about this. They asked a question about this Anthropocene and this idea that now, you know, the Anthropocene is this concept that the human now is somehow creating our own geology. And I think this is a completely stupid concept because, and this work shows that really well because, you know, in the main part of the diagram where we are this 0.1 millimeter on the end of this line. We won't exist in maybe 200 years, you know? But to make geology you need hundreds of millions of years. So I don't know. Maybe all of somehow there maybe will be another Carboniferous period, perhaps. You know, at some point in the future, if the plants again start to, you know, if the humans disappear. Humanity disappears, and the plant life becomes much more dominant again as the planet stays hot and warm, and then it can suck out this carbon again. Maybe then there'll be another chance for a different kind of evolution. Maybe like a dolphin world, or I don't know, insect world, or something. I would be quite happy if dolphins ruled the world.
Thank you for your lecture. Actually, your artwork is very interesting, and I have a question to you. Have you ever thought about making it, to digitalize it, to make it to make a computer version of it, or maybe some video project, you know, showing this development through a time scale, and to make it more entertaining or something, then it would be more practical to project this scheme on a wall, and it could be, I don't know, transferred from one space to another, not to be exhibited only in one museum or gallery, but traveled around Europe, for example, or somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I did think about it. In fact, the first version, when I started to work on it in Donetsk, I was thinking about making it digitally, just with using Illustrator, so that it could be printed and put onto the wall. But actually, it was too difficult. Somehow, it's like a really huge file, because and also, when I was developing it, it worked so much better to do it by hand, because I had to It's difficult to explain, but I went through many different versions. And I had to start at one end and also simultaneously at the other end, and then try and bring them together. And because I couldn't understand how it would physically actually work to from one end to the other. I can't really explain it still. I had to use quite a lot of intuition to figure out how it would work, and then afterwards I made sure that it was scientifically correct. But to make it digital, it would make it more accessible, of course. Yeah, I agree. But there was something about doing it by hand, like to draw it by hand, like it was 3 months of this process, and there was some kind of like romantic notion that I had that it was somehow I was connecting to this like labor, this question of labor, right? These coal miners.
It feels more authentic, more artistic. Yes, it has its own feel. I don't know. I even thought about integrating this, for example, digital version with some. You might collaborate with some talented programmers, for example, and so this thing would be ongoing because time is ongoing, and some talented IT guys could write a script. So this scheme you created will live its own life. It's some ongoing process, project, some online project or something like that.
Yeah. Are you a programmer?
No, I'm an architect.
But no, it would be nice. Or maybe it would even be nice to like write a script that generates this for any place. If you like put some facts about the geology of any location, and it would like generate it. This could be quite nice because it's how I said earlier. Like this isn't This kind of question is not unique to Donetsk. This is the question that in the abstract for the conference, which is one of the things that really interested me, was this kind of where it says here, originating in Europe, modernism spread around the globe throughout the 20th century, demonstrating the capability of being local and global at the same time. So what I tried to show here is this kind of like local-global connection. There's like the local is Donetsk, but this is a completely global phenomenon. Like it's a universalist kind of way of seeing the world. So it would be nice to be able to do this for any place, and maybe that's what the software could do. But yeah, I don't know. I can't do that.
Everything is possible.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I have a really simple question. Have you been out slag heaps in Donetsk?
Have I been to some slag heaps? Yeah.
Yeah, so you come there. Cool. So you have come there.
Yeah.
Great.
The terracons.
Yeah. Do you have the similar in England or?
Yeah, but they're not usually in the city centre.
Thank you. I miss this place so much. It's like kind of romantic feelings from childhood.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And of course, there was a big one actually on the site of Izolatia.
Yeah.
With this one with the deer sculpture on the top of it. But yeah. Actually, where I was living in England for the last 15 years, it's has a very strong traditional industrial history of mining, like mining copper. And so I think this is where I begin to think about all this geophilosophy stuff, because I was living there and surrounded by this mining heritage, like these old industrial sites and everything. It was much earlier. It was like 1820s to 1860. So it was actually, and this is another very interesting thing about like capital and industrialization. It's like the conglomeration of like industrial capital like moves around the globe when one resource is finished, when they take everything that's possible to take, then it's the same people just move to the next place. And this is what happened with John Hughes. Like, he was a coal miner in Wales, and the coal mining finished there, so then he's like looking for a new place, you know. So in the case of Cornwall, where I lived in the UK, which is this copper, tin, lead, and arsenic mining district, all of these engineers and miners went from there to South America. Yeah, and they took with them the same as when John Hughes went into Ukraine, like taking this culture of like football and this birds, this miners with. They told me they had it in Donetsk. It's like pigeons racing these birds. I mean, these things like follow miners all around the world. It's really interesting. Yeah, but terracons, yeah, and that smell of like stepping out from the airplane and smelling the coke factories. Yeah, I can remember it well. And the brown water, of course, in the bath. Yeah. Any more questions? One at the back there. Who has the microphone? So there's one question in the back. No? No? Oh, okay, it was a mistake. There wasn't a question. No? Oh, one over there.
I can speak loud.
Okay.
Just one question to you. Do you still see Donetsk in your dreams? I mean, when you close your eyes? And secondly, do you still foresee visiting this place somewhere in the future, anywhere in your life?
What was the second part?
Do you think you will be visiting this place anywhere in your lifetime? I mean, from now on?
I don't see it in my dreams, but I did spend 2 years there, and my, unfortunately now, ex-wife is from there. So I have quite a strong emotional connection. My ex-wife's family are now in Kyiv, luckily, but they also had to run and lost everything, and I can often think about that, and I often think about the simple things, times that I spent with them in their house and things. So yeah, I do remember it. I don't dream of it when I close my eyes though. And I don't know, I would really like to go back there, but who knows? Actually, I must admit, when I was there in the, maybe until February 2014, so I left just before, and it was a difficult decision. I wanted to leave. My wife said to me, "Oh, we don't have to leave, nothing will happen. It's always tension here, you shouldn't worry about it." And I said to her and her family, I don't know, it feels like in the international way, everything is different this time. And yeah, it's I don't have my life from there, and I didn't spend my childhood there, but I do have connections. Yeah. Anything more? Okay, thanks for coming.